We learned today that a candidate for U.S. Senate, a candidate who would swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States if she won, does not know the first thing about the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights. In our fifth story tonight, Republican Tea Party candidate Christine O'Donnell of Delaware literally did not know the first thing in the First Amendment. It is, of course, the fundamental principle on which this nation was founded. A principle, as you'll see, that she actually disputed is even in the Constitution. For the record, before we go on, the relevant words themselves. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Seems pretty clear. On that basis, Democratic candidate Chris Coons opposes the teaching of creationism, which U.S. courts have found to be a religious doctrine in public schools. Why? Because taking taxpayer dollars to fund teaching of a religious doctrine would be the government teaching and establishing a religion. And government cannot do that. But in a debate today, O'Donnell's first claimed that evolution is just a theory. By the way, gravity is explained in science by the gravitational theory. But if you think gravity is just a theory, you're welcome to try that out and see how it works out for you. O'Donnell then revealed her ignorance about the Constitution, cracking up the audience of law professors and students, as you'll hear for yourself.
Our public schools should be teaching broadly accepted scientific fact, not religious doctrine.
Wow, you've just proved how little you know. The reason we're in the mess we're in is because our so-called leaders in Washington no longer view the indispensable principles of our founding as truly that, indispensable. We're supposed to have limited government, low taxation.
One of those indispensable principles is the separation of church and state.
Okay, with that, very good dialogue. We appreciate that. Let's, though, move on so we can get to all the panelists and cover a number of areas. Chad Livengood from the News Journal, please, if you could ask the next question, please.
Where in the Constitution is separation of church and state?
It's in, an excellent point.
Hold on, please.
That was embarrassing. The moderator moved on, but Coons went back to it as part of a broader debate about the Constitution, including O'Donnell's support of Griswold v. Connecticut, while she rejects Roe v. Wade, which was made possible, if not inevitable, actually, by Griswold. Despite the laughter she got earlier, O'Donnell kept at it.
In my view, it is important to know whether you have on my side a candidate who believes and supports those things, and on the other side, a candidate who's both unfamiliar with.
Let me just clarify.
Please.
You're telling me that the separation of church and state is found in the First Amendment.
Government shall make no establishment of religion.
That's in the First Amendment.
My favorite part is how smug she looks. Which is awesome. All right, anyway, joining us tonight is Jamie Raskin, professor of constitutional law at American University, as well as state senator of Maryland. Thanks for your time tonight.
My pleasure. Happy to be with you.
Yeah, great to have you here. Chris Coons actually understated things, didn't he? The First Amendment does not prohibit Congress from establishing religion, does not merely separate church and state. It says Congress shall not even make any law respecting an establishment of religion. What's the difference there?
Well, that's right. No part of a government can make any law respecting an establishment of religion. And also, the First Amendment guarantees the free exercise of every individual to choose his or her own religion without the state imposing another religious choice upon them. So, I guess, the Republican candidate is right in this very narrow sense that the First Amendment doesn't explicitly say that there's a wall of separation between church and state. That was a phrase that Thomas Jefferson first used in his famous letter to the Danbury Baptists. But what the conservatives want to say basically is anything that the government does with respect to religion is okay as long as they don't literally establish a church. So that would mean it's okay to tax the taxpayers to give money to support particular religious denominations or religious activities or prayer in the schools, the kinds of things that they want to push. And so really they've been attacking Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and the founders of the Constitution who really did believe in a radical separation of church and state. That was the whole meaning of the First Amendment and really the most revolutionary thing about the American Constitution.
Yeah, what would Thomas Jefferson know about the Constitution anyway? And by the way, she went further. She said, establishment of, that we cannot establish religion in the First Amendment. Come on. So she got it completely and utterly wrong. But let's go further here to the core of this here. How revolutionary an idea was that at the time when the Founding Fathers said we shall not have a state religion?
Well, I mean, look, the glory of the American Constitution, beyond the separation of powers, which had appeared before in other places, or due process, which had appeared before in other places, was the radical break from centuries of fusion of church and state in Europe. And this history of holy wars, the Catholics fighting the Protestants, the Crusades, the Inquisition, witchcraft trials, the rack and the screws and torture of people because of their religious views. The American Enlightenment revolutionaries wanted to break from that violent history of religious conflict which they were fleeing in Europe, and so wrote into the First Amendment these incredible principles that there will be no establishment of religion here, and every person would be guaranteed a liberty of conscience to make his or her own choices to worship how he or she pleases, or not at all, as many of the founders indeed chose not to do. Many of them were, described as heretics and deists and infidels, and Thomas Jefferson was, considered a radical and a Jacobin because of his skepticism towards organized religion. And in truth, the Constitution doesn't mention the word God. Article 6 says there shall be no religious test for public office, and our founders wanted to create a society that was safe for religion and for people to practice religion freely, but that meant no religion could come to dominate government and then oppress everybody else.
Jamie, real quick, I mean, this is not a matter of dispute, is it? I mean, because every once in a while you'll see these conservatives say, oh, some of the founding fathers really believed in God, and hence we must be right. I mean, is this something that's disputed in legal circles, or is it something that's absolutely clear? These guys, the founding fathers, clearly said in the Constitution and meant that we shall not establish a religion and that there should be a separation of church and state.
I mean, if you ask me, it's perfectly clear. Now, I got to say, Justice Thomas, for example, takes a very pinched view of the Establishment Clause, where he basically says, not only does it mean only that you can't establish a religion the way that the Anglican Church is established, that we have a Church of England, but only Congress cannot establish a church. There are those who take the position, and I think Justice Thomas is still one of them, who believe that it's okay for states to establish their own churches. That is not the mainstream view. That's not the pervasive view. But, the Republican nominee in Delaware does speak for a right-wing position, which is that the whole wall of separation understanding of the Constitution, which goes back to the founders, is something that's been imposed by Thomas Jefferson and Madison and by other radical Jacobins.
Right.
So they're basically still fighting a civil conflict that goes back to the beginning of the American Republic, and they're contesting what the values of the country are. But what's made us a great country, if you think about us versus the people that we're dealing with in the Islamic world, is that we don't believe in theocracy. We don't believe in an imposition of a religion where everybody's got to follow what the state is saying.
At least we've brought some people together. Conservative right-wingers here maybe agree with the conservative government of Saudi Arabia. Well, there's some positive out of this. Jamie,
well, there's a lot of theocracy on the march all around the world.
Oh, unfortunately, there is. Jamie Raskin, professor of constitutional law at American University. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Pleasure's mine.
Now let's turn to MSNBC political analyst Howard Fineman, senior political editor for Huffington Post as well. Good evening, Howard.
Hi, Jay.
All right, look, even if O'Donnell has already been written off politically, Howard, do her views speak poorly of the people who elected her, namely the Tea Party voters?
Yeah, it probably doesn't help the Tea Party at all. I mean, I suppose you could argue that having Christine O'Donnell around and speaking the way she did today makes Sharon Angle look like Doris Kearns Goodwin or something. But, that's the only way she might be useful as a point of contrast. And what's really killing here, what's damning here, is that the Tea Party is run in the name of rights and freedom. And all of those rights and freedoms are enshrined in the very amendments that she seems totally ignorant of. So that's really the crushing contrast here.
Well, they always seem to say that they care so much about the Constitution, but other than the Second Amendment and this bizarre theory on the 10th Amendment, I never really honestly saw them give a damn. I mean, when Bush was running over the Fourth Amendment, when we still have warrantless wiretaps, I've never seen them protest that. Have you seen them protest anything outside of those two, or care about anything outside of those two amendments?
No, not really, except that the whole sort of mood music, the theme music, if you will, of the Tea Party is "Don't tread on me" and "Don't trample on my rights." And that's a big part of what the Bill of Rights is all about. And they were enshrined and made applicable to all the states and to all citizens by the post-Civil War amendments. And, there's some of the amendments that they're also questioning right now, because the 14th Amendment basically says that that everyone here who's born here, naturalized here, is a citizen of the United States, and their rights cannot be abridged by any of the states. And yet the sort of local orientation of the Tea Party, you heard Christine O'Donnell talk about local option, what the local people want to do. That's something that is protected by the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, I love that argument. I love the Constitution, and I'd like to repeal the 14th Amendment. Doesn't make much sense to me, but how?
Well, that's what the Civil War was. That's sort of what the Civil War was about.
Yeah, I think we had a war over that. That's right. So now, real quick though, let's pick a religion, because if we're going to establish a religion and there's no separation of church and state, we got to pick one, right? Is it going to be Episcopalian, Southern Baptist, Mormon, maybe Beck, Harry Reid, Mitt Romney?
I think there's an answer to this question, Cenk. It's the Aqua Buddha religion of Rand Paul when he was in college. I think we're all
it's not a bad answer. I hadn't thought of that.
We're also all going to have to be worshiping Aqua Buddha after the Tea Party takes charge.
Right, because I presume they're not going with Islam. That's probably out. But
probably out. But Aqua Buddha, keep your eye on that one.
Okay, I will. Okay. All right, Howard Fineman, senior political editor for the Huffington Post. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.